Good evening. Thank you all for coming. You can hear me just fine now. My name is Trent Carls, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director for the Lexington History Museums. We're very grateful for you all this evening. Here tonight, I don't have my prop with me, but we're here to celebrate and honor the launch of a wonderful publication, Revolutionary Stories. Carla, thank you for holding it up. A round of applause. We're going to be bringing this book to life tonight with the wonderful folks that we have on hand. This event this evening is long in the making, so we do have a few thank yous to throw out. Of course, primarily to the Revolutionary Stories book and event producers, Carla Fortman, Carol Webb, Hayden Cowboy, and most particularly the LHM Interpretation Committee. They reviewed, edited, and read this book 2,000 times, and the end product was quite perfect, so congratulations on that. We also want to thank our wonderful partners, the Carey Memorial Foundation, for being such wonderful co-sponsors. And thank you to LexMedia for being here to record this evening and to preserve this for future generations to watch. We do have a great lineup of speakers tonight. And Ben Soul, who also contributed this wonderful model of the meeting house, which you can Chris Hurley, Paula Shaughnessy, Bill Poole, and in general, you are in for a great time. If you enjoyed tonight, but even if you don't, the Lexington History Museums has a great batch of upcoming events that you might want to check out. This Thursday is our Tavern Night, which is one of our excellent events that are... What did I say? Saturday. We're going to go back to the recording. This Saturday is Tavern Night, which is one of our wonderful events. Next Saturday is Alarm in Lexington, which is a series of short plays at the Hancock Clark House by Candlelight. And then we have a Zoom book chat on Phyllis Wheatley Peters, a biography of a genius in bondage, Tuesday the 24th. From 7 to 8 p.m. And of course, the big one is just 5 weeks away. Patriots Day is right around the corner. Our curator, Jesse, and I, were in cleaning the Hancock Clark House. Say that 5 times fast. So it is bright, shiny, and ready to go for that event. And if you enjoy all of those things, and even if you don't, you really should consider becoming a member. Members get first notice of all these great events. They get discounts on all these great events. They get free entry into the museums on Patriots Day, so you can save yourself some time and trouble, and many more great benefits. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. Please visit us again. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful co-host, Helen Luke.
Hello, everyone. I'll make this brief. On behalf of Carey Library, I'd like to welcome you all tonight. My name is Ellen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Carey Library. We are so pleased to be partnering with Lexington History Museums on this event. Last year, we collaborated on another event along with many other local organizations to present a program titled Liberty is Sweet, the Hidden History of the American Revolution. And you can find that recording of that event on our YouTube channel, along with other programs we have presented in partnership with Lexington History Museums. And speaking of our YouTube channel, Jake, as Trent mentioned, is here to record tonight's event. And once edited, the recording will be posted to the library's YouTube channel as well as LexMedia's website. So thank you all and enjoy the program.
Most of you know me, my name is Carla Fortman, and I recently read a book called History Matters. It was written by the daughter and manager of the author David McCullough, putting together his speeches and essays and things, and really making the case that history does matter. His intensive research for his book 1776 and John Adams have certainly informed me about many of the things that happened around the Revolution. That intensive research leads to discovery, new insights, and greater understanding of our past events. history is always teaching us, is what the book says. I recommend it. Tonight's stories will illuminate this. We began about 3 years ago when a website called Freedom's Way asked the Lexington Historical Society to do some online stories about the events of 1775. And that was given to the Interpretation Committee, and I was on that committee. And so we got busy and wrote some stories. Long story short, we have a book now of those stories. 29 stories were written. Every monument in Lexington, the story behind it is illuminated in this book. So tonight we want to tempt you with not only the purchase of the book, I hope you will read the book also. The bibliography alone, most of the things at Cary Library and in our archives is worth the price that you pay. You want to bring it along when visitors visit you from outside and they want to see the historic events. You want to go to house museums and go around the green. You'll know the story behind every monument there. Tonight we're going to take 3 of those stories in the book, and all of them part of the larger story that we know as the American Revolution. So our first presenter will be Ben Sewell, not yet, and he produced this magnificent replica that you see. Ben Sewell's labor of love, I say, is informative for those who want to know more about these regular colonial meeting places, places where all residents met every Sunday for worship, mutual respect, and sharing responsibilities of the town, continues today in our town at Lexington. The town meeting starts at the end of the month in your direct. We are fortunate to live in a modern place which cherishes and welcomes visitors in a very large part of our country, to learn about the very large part we played in our country's history. After Ben, Christopher Hurley will become Reverend Jonas Clark, who spent 50+ years in the pulpit of this church. Paul O'Shaughnessy, on the other side, has a chest foot. And Bill Poole, a Lexington Minuteman, and a participant in a unique and cooperative project for the Minuteman National Historic Park to find the original site of Parker's Revenge. Carol Webb, who did most of the editing and contributed her expertise in organizing for this book, will lead our questions after the presentation. So without further ado, I'll ask Ben to come on.
Thank you, Carla. So we're starting off with a meeting house, which, as Carla said, was really the central focus of the town of Cambridge Farms and Lexington. So we're kicking off with that. Our first image is, yes, from Lexington's town records comes this entry. At public meeting at Cambridge Farms, November 18, 1712. Voted to underprop the great beams for the meeting house and to mend the leaky places. And immediately after that vote, keeping in mind they were likely sitting in that very creaky and leaking building, voted to, it was voted that we build a new meeting house in convenient time. So 2 months later, in January 1713, the town meeting voted to build a new meeting house. It was to be built in the new mode, also known as the flat roof or English mode, as was the recently completed meeting house 1712 in Concord. You can flip the slide. As you can see, that's half of the Concord meeting house in the Doolittle print. The first Lexington meeting house of 1692, which you just saw before, was to be replaced, and it was likely built in the old mode, or the bevel roof mode, now known as hip roof. The dimensions of the new meeting house would be 50 feet long, 40 feet wide, with the stud height, that is the height of the side walls from the bottom sill to the roof trusses, to be 24 feet. There was to be a single balcony or gallery, presumably with 2 interior staircases leading to the second level, as that was the common practice at the time, although that is not mentioned in the notes. A committee of 5 men was designated to manage the construction, and it was to be completed, except the painting and pews, by September 29th, 1714. 4 weeks later, at the next meeting, several votes were taken that indicate that considerable conversation had taken place around town in the intervening time about the nature of the proposed meeting house. Since the Concord Meeting House was to be used as a model, it is likely that some of the decisions made by the town of Concord came under consideration in Lexington as well. The particular issues that are reflected in the minutes of the February meeting were whether or not to have a belfry and whether or not to have a second gallery. As to the belfry, Concord had decided not to construct one. Lexington was divided on the issue, as the meeting voted that they will not build a belfry, and then voted that they will allow a belfry on a particular charge, presumably meaning that it would be built if private individuals were willing to pay for it. At that time, there were 2 kinds of belfries, one being a steeple attached to the meeting house, and the other being a separate structure. We know eventually the second kind was built on what is now known as Belfry Hill in 1761, and then moved to the Common 6 years after, where it can be seen in the Ralph Earl Amos Doolittle print of the skirmish on Lexington Common. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah, there it is. You can see that next to, but not part of the meeting house. The upshot, of course, as to the dimensions of the meeting house, again, the meeting was of 2 minds. They voted that they will not enlarge the meeting house. Then they voted that if any person or persons within the precinct wished to enlarge the meeting house by adding 4 feet to its height, they could do so by paying for the extra costs themselves. Clearly, there have been discussions in the community, and the resulting votes were a compromise to satisfy all parties. It is interesting to speculate on what the conversations were about. It is likely that some people were willing to pay more money for more seating room. This was happening just a year before Cambridge Farms, then a part of Cambridge, became an independent town. People were probably thinking that a larger meeting house would be necessary for a growing community. Then there were undoubtedly people who wanted to spend as little as possible on the new construction. And then another faction may have raised class and race issues. It is widely accepted that the upper galleries of New England meeting houses were used to accommodate paupers and slaves and teenage boys. Perhaps there were folks who felt that a clear separation of themselves from less desirable elements was necessary. The upshot, of course, was that the building was made taller, and the second gallery was added, albeit one with very little headroom, with a course of smaller windows under the eaves of the sloping roof. This can be seen in the blue little print. Yeah. Of course, this building witnessed the events of April 19th, 1775, about which you will hear more this evening. But a few words about the end of its life might be appropriate as well. In 1886, the Reverend Carlton Staples of the First Parish of Lexington, at a meeting of the Lexington Historical Society, read a paper entitled A Sketch of the History of Lexington Common. Staples held the pulpit at First Parish, and from that pulpit, which stands in the 4th building occupied by his congregation, he could look out the window and see that common, and in particular the spot where the previous 3 meeting houses had stood. Staples was something of an amateur historian as well as a minister, so he took an avid interest in the story of the town and the church which he served. He related the history of the second meeting house, its construction, and the part it played in the events of the day the king's troops came to town. But when he related the time when the building was taken down to make way for a new church building, one should not be surprised if he spoke the following passage with some strong feelings. This building was torn down in 1794 to give place to a more pretentious, comfortable, and beautiful structure apparently without the slightest hesitation from any feeling of respect for the venerable and historic house. Here the bodies of the dead were brought and laid upon the floor after the battle, but the father's body put for nothing but kindling wood. Such was the end of the meeting house of 1714. The loss of such a historic edifice is indeed sad in hindsight, but we must not judge the Lexingtonians of that time. The building was 3 generations old and undoubtedly drafty and uncomfortable. Remember, too, that 1794 was a mere 11 years after the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution, and 7 years after the ratification of the Constitution. So the people of Lexington, and indeed the country, had not developed the viewpoint necessary to see themselves and their meeting house in a historic perspective. This reminds us that we in our time need to do our best to preserve that which is of importance for those who follow. Thank you.
Good evening. It's good to see you all here for this good book launch. I'm not talking about the good book. I'm talking about a very good book. I thank the museums for the chance to speak just a little bit about the Reverend Mr. Jonas Clark. The meeting house model is terrific. Every time I look at it, I see new details. Today, I noticed that the bracing in the 2 center trusses is different than the bracing on the trusses next to them, and I'm going to ask you about that later. I won't be preaching fire and brimstone tonight, but I promise that after me there will be cannonballs and bullets. In day-to-day life, a meeting house, just by its very presence, was a landmark. They were, with their distinctive size and shape, easily recognizable to travelers, with directions and distances being measured from them. For town meetings, it was expected that all landowning men would meet in the meeting house to carry on the proper business of the town, electing selectmen and constables, voting on funding schools and roads, and perhaps deciding on the minister's salary. For religious purposes, the meeting house in Lexington fell under the purview of Jonas Clark for nearly 50 years. Such a long tenure shows the strong bonds he was able to achieve with the townspeople. Reverend Jonas Clark was settled to the ministry in Lexington in 1755. He boarded with the widow of his predecessor. 2 years later, he married her granddaughter, Lucy Bowes, and started a family. Being the moral backbone of the town of Lexington meant that Jonas Clark was called upon for a variety of tasks apart from his usual Sunday sermons. This is a special Sunday night sermon given to a society of young men. It supposes they have asked his advice on sartorial choices and accessories. He pleasantly responds with paragraph after paragraph, essentially saying the same thing. Demonstrable piety will get you farther with God, and society then will ostentatious adornment. Silver and gold are mentioned a mere half dozen times. Piety, 50. It's natural to think of Jonas Clark as the Reverend Clark, or as a powerful political influence. But he was also, in many ways, just another farmer in town, doing chores, as did his wife, and buying what he couldn't easily produce. On a page in the account book of William Monroe, we see that Jonas Clark was a frequent customer. I see candles in there a lot. I don't know if he was buying for the meeting house as well as his own large house. Also, chocolate, coffee, tobacco, in moderation, a amount of ice. There is also a mention of silk, and I dare say that Lucy, in keeping with her station in life, would welcome it. Although his ministry was in the quiet farming town of Lexington, in 1768, Reverend Clark's renown earned him an invitation to preach at the annual drumhead election of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company on June Day, the first Monday in June. In this sermon, Jonas Clark spoke about the wisdom and perhaps sacred duty of military preparedness. And with the Townshend Revenue Acts in mind, he reiterated the rights of man, life, liberty, and property. It is notable that King George III is favorably compared to the good biblical King Jehoshaphat. The Lexington History Museums caretake some of the daily diaries of Reverend Clark. There are the usual entries about the weather and family events. However, this diary also gives a window into some of his duties, where he preached, parishioner burials, and church meetings. This particular month, October 1768, notes that on Saturday the 1st, troops arrived to occupy Boston. The next day, Sunday, again shows pleasant weather, but also the words, day of darkness. This is a biblical reference to the book of Joel. His sermon would have been politically charged that day. Reverend Clark knew how to change with the times and still keep his congregation rooted in devotion to God. As an example, singing in church, beyond psalms, had previously been controversial. This sermon from 1770 has been endorsing hymn singing, complete with chapter and verse citations and an exhortation to keep improving, to aspire here on earth, to be part of the heavenly choir. He denounces those who sing secular, vain, and foolish songs and condemns those who sing profane songs. I'm not sure what his reaction would have been to a song line in Nottingham Ale regarding ale inspiring ministers to preach without notes. I am sure he needed inspiration only from heaven. Mind you, the Reverend was not against alcohol. He did bottle his own hard cider. Many of you here may have attended our tea burning reenactments. Before the fun of throwing tea into the bonfire, there is a reading of resolutions the town had adopted. They were written, so far as I know, by the firebrand hand of Jonas Clark. They incisively illustrate the far-ranging dangers of the Tea Act legislation. They were published in Boston newspapers. Note in the upper right-hand corner, the Liberty cap on a pole in the masthead there. There's no doubt on which side of the political spectrum, Tory or Patriot, this newspaper favored. And the resolutions end with an ominous warning to Tories about being shunned and hated. We see here the vigorous onset of the "you're either with us or against us" rhetoric that plays out in actions just before and during the revolution. Now, the resolves also contain the origin of the oath of the current-day Lexington Minutemen. We trust in God that should the current state of our affairs require it, we shall be ready to sacrifice our estates and everything dear in life, yea, and life itself in support of the common cause. Moving forward in this general era of the eve of the revolution, we arrive at the actual eve itself, April 18th, 1775, when Jonas and Lucy's abode was a hub of activity. The extra-legal Provincial Patriot Congress had been meeting in Concord, and Lucy's cousin, John Hancock, was staying with the Clarks at Lexington. Hancock had a retinue. Where Hancock went, Samuel Adams went. Hancock was engaged to Dolly Quincy, and she was here. Hancock was very close to his widowed Aunt Lydia, who had helped to raise him. Since she was also Lucy's aunt, it was entirely natural that she was here too. John Hancock had a personal secretary, John Lowell. He wasn't staying at the house. He was quartered in Buckman Tavern, but it wouldn't have been strange to see him at the house. And because Army officers that night had been skulking about, some Lexington militia under Sergeant William Monroe were on guard duty. Then Paul Revere and William Dawes rode in with news that the King's army was on the march in this direction. And let's not forget all the Clark children. Mrs. Clark, I think we'll need more potatoes from the south. The next day there was, of course, the battle, but I jump ahead of you to mention how Mr. Clark related the battle in a published narrative in sermon. Suffice it to say that the British are depicted as ogres, the patriots as courageous saints, and he puts courage into his congregation by promising them that God will, in time, punish the bloodthirsty oppressors, and that his flock, faithful to God, will undoubtedly triumph. I want to mention a little bit more about the meeting house. Two items you can see in the meeting house model. In the near corner to me, later you'll be able to see this, at the corner of the roof, there was a cannonball hole. And nearer to Sarah McDonough, on one of the balconies, there is a keg of gunpowder. And there is the story of Joshua Simons, who, when the British were pursuing him in the meeting house, cocked his musket and had it at the keg of gunpowder. And if anyone came after him, they'd all go to Kingdom Come. But one note as I wrap up to a close. Reverend Clark's narrative of April mentions that in the afternoon, when the army expedition had retreated from Concord and had returned to this town, their relief column from Boston fired cannonballs at Lexington. A first-hand account of that is from Llewellyn Baldwin, then the major of 3 Woburn militia companies. The meeting house proved to be little protection against cannon fire, but Baldwin survived and stated that he did not know of any men killed by the cannon fire. Praise the Lord. Thank you. As a little postscript, I'd like to point out that there are 4 extant meeting houses rather nearby from the 18th century. One is close as Burlington. When it was built, it was called, was part of Woburn's second parish. And that also Linfield, Groton, and Amesbury. You can see that in design, apart from the steeples added later, etc., in design and function and structure, they are essentially the same as the model you see in front of you.
Regarding regarding the ministries or the ministers in Lexington and elsewhere in Boston. Hugh Percy, who arrived in July of 1774 from Kinsale, Ireland, wrote to his father, "I am sorry to say that no body of men in this province are so extremely injurious to the peace and tranquility of it as the clergy. They preach up sedition openly from their pulpits. Nay, some of them have gone so far as to absolutely refuse the sacrament till they have signed, till their communicants have signed a paper of the most seditious kind." So, thank you, sir. Hugh Percy was one of the more, I'm sorry, I didn't do this properly here. Hugh Percy was one of the more capable officers of many who were out in the field on April 19th of 1775. And there is a rather remarkable story. We are actually able to quote his own words. And the reason is that he was a prolific writer back to other officers and back to his father in particular in Northumberland. The Earl, by the way, is a courtesy title. His father is the Duke of Northumberland at Alnwick Castle in the county of Northumberland. And so he's writing back, "Dear father," this and that, and he's describing the people and the events and such in Boston at the time. He arrives, as I said, in July of 1774, and he leaves with the British Army when they depart in March of 1776, which is the 250th anniversary, which is just coming up. In this, he describes the events of April 19th, but also gives us a lovely amount of detail about conditions, living conditions and such. All of this was almost lost. And a gentleman, the Reverend Edward Griffin Porter of Lexington, of the Hancock Church in Lexington here, was writing a history of the town and took up a correspondence with the then Duke of Northumberland. They became friends, and he was eventually invited to actually visit Alnwick Castle. And as they were going around, and he describes this in a letter, they spied a small box, a small tin box with a blue ribbon around it, and opened it up, and inside were all of the letters. And they have been reprinted. They were then printed in the early part of the 20th century, and you can today purchase, as well as our wonderful book, you can also get his letters reprinted. And so and I was just reading from one of them a moment ago. Just to go on about his, so this is how we're able to reconstruct and then quote these things in our publications. So when you read that, you are reading the real deal. This is not made up, it isn't interpreted, it's the real thing. And then when you combine that with the terrain, and he describes it, the fundamentals of the day are that Colonel Smith of the 10th Regiment leads about 750 grenadiers and light infantry out to Concord, and they set upon the Lexington militia in the early morning. Sorry, Bill. But then are set upon themselves in Concord and are then very, very badly mauled on the way all the way back. Percy is leading a relief column of about 1,200 men and 2 cannon that come out and save their bacon right here in Lexington without a moment to spare. And he describes that moment in his writings, and we quote it in the Revolution, in the stories book. But you take that, and he also says that he took his brigade and he put them on a height of land overlooking the town, which if you go down by Monroe Tavern, It's right there. And you can see this also in the Doolittle prints. And the fourth Doolittle print depicts this moment of Colonel Smith and Earl Percy meeting on horses. And I have actually, must say that I'm so fascinated reading all of this that I went and I figured out where must he be? Where was Amos Doolittle standing when they did that? There's a small, as you go out on Woburn Street, there's a small, I think it's the original Woburn Street, that kicks off to the left a little bit and then rejoins the road further on. If you go up that, there's a little conservation area, a hill. If you go to the top of it, there's a house in the way today, but you can clearly see that that's exactly where it must have been. So we can actually recreate these things down to the actual location. I mentioned earlier that he brought 2 cannon with him. One of those cannon we can see in the Doolittle print, and by his own account, is now in the front yard of the Muzzy condominiums. There's a stone cannon that was actually designed by the same Mr. Porter, and it depicts a cannon pointing towards the meeting house. And so that hole we're talking about here was probably made by that cannon firing right up what is today Massachusetts Avenue and straight onto the green and right through that building. By Percy's account, that discouraged him. And it would discourage you. So, and he writes that, pardon me, that in obedience to your excellency's orders, I marched yesterday morning at 9 o'clock with the 1st Brigade and 2 field pieces in order to cover the retreat of the Grenadiers and Light Infantry on their return from the expedition to Concord. And so I immediately ordered, as he arrives in Lexington, I immediately ordered the 2 field pieces to fire at the rebels and drew up the brigade on a height. The shot from the cannon had the desired effect and stopped the rebels for a little time, who immediately dispersed and endeavored to surround us, being very numerous. As it began to grow pretty late and we had 15 miles to retire and only our 36 rounds, I ordered the Grenadiers and Light Infantry to move off, first covering them with my brigade and sending out very strong flanking parties, which were absolutely necessary, as there was not a stone wall, house, or anything through which in appearance, before an appearance evacuated, from whence the rebels did not appear and fire upon us. So he describes this circle of fire that just followed them all the way down to Cambridge and over to Charlestown. So, but Percy is clearly an experienced officer. He has fought in the French and Indian Wars, he's fought in Minden, he's fought in Europe, he's been an aide-de-camp to His Majesty the King. He knows what he's doing, but at the end of the day, he does have a gruff compliment for these militia. And he writes, anyone who sees them as an irregular mob is much mistaken. Even though he earlier writes rather scathingly of them as scoundrels and villains, and brave in numbers but cowardly alone. But he says, anyone who sees them as an irregular mob is much mistaken. They have men amongst them who know very well what they are about. So I invite you to go to some of these seminal works. Here, first of all, I won't say that this is our book, but this book allows you and goes through each of these monuments and gives you the backstory. Why is it there? What is it doing? Why is there a cannon in front of a school? Who would know, right? But you look at you read this, and then you look at the Doolittle print, and you go, aha, that's the cannon. Okay. You wonder about people like Jeremy Lister, and again, we have his account. And then lastly, of course, we have Hugh Percy's account here. Valuable stuff, but this is what allows us to speak about these things with precision and knowledge, and we're not making it up. So I encourage you all to do this, and God save His Majesty the King. Oh, and this is Bill Poole, who is a scurrilous rebel.
Thank you, Paul. Interesting as always. I'm not sure whether they have saved the best for the last or the least for the last. But I'm going to talk about Parker's revenge. There have been centuries of conjecture concerning the location of what has been called Parker's revenge, where the men from Lexington met the regulars as they returned from Concord. Many historians have advanced their opinions with respect to where the battle took place and what was the nature of the engagement. Tradition had identified the site where the battle road ran close to the base of a large rocky mountain. However, anyone with military experience would say that was terrible. It's too close to the road. There's no place to hide up there, and it can be flanked very easily, cutting off the retreat. So the attempt to determine the site where that took place involved an archaeological investigation. That took place from 2020 to 2016. And since I'm going to talk about archaeology, I'm going to have to put on my archaeology hat. Oh my gosh. Yes, I'll put on my archaeology hat. This 4-year investigation was one of the highlights of my life. We were led by Margaret Meg Waters, who has done archaeology all over the world. And I don't know if any of you remember a short-lived program called Time Team America, which was an archaeological program. Meg was one of the leading archaeologists on that. And since metal detecting was perhaps the most important element of the investigation, we've had the privilege of having Dr. Doug Scott, who's leading, perhaps the most leading archaeologist and user of metal detecting. He was the one who did part of the Custer's battlefield, the little big home, and introduced metal detecting there, and has came up with an unbelievable description of just how things took place almost in time because of the use of metal detectors. He is also known throughout the world as a locator of mass graves, and he was sent over to the Bosnian and Herzegovina War and so forth, and he was there finding the mass graves that were there. And he said it was one of the most dangerous things he ever did because people didn't want to find the graves. But we were so lucky to have him there. Can I have the first slide, please? Or will I have to do that?
You're good. She's got it.
Okay. So these are a few pictures with regard to our archaeological team. This is the team up here, core team. These are some of the musket balls that we found. This is me holding a wonderful decorative button that we found up there. Here's people doing the things, a lot of scraping of earth. This is Meg Waters, with the ground penetrating radar device. We used all kinds of methods to do this. The best, however, turned out to be metal detecting. Now, metal detecting detects every metal. You can set it for ferrous, that's iron bearing, or non-ferrous. But it picks up everything. Usually set ours, first of all, for kind of a broad spectrum. And unfortunately, it picks up aluminum. So we found an awful lot of beer cans. And our first finding is that the colonists preferred Budweiser 2-1.
I never drank up there.
So, can I have the next one? I have to see myself. There is a musket ball, as it appears in the C2, right here. Right here. This is how you uncover them. And they were found an average of 6.5 inches deep in the ground. But the smallest was 3.5 inches, and the deepest 9.5 inches. Next slide, please. This is me finding my first musket. And I can't describe the sense of elation that you feel when you're holding in your hand a musket ball fired at that time 240 years ago by perhaps someone from our Lexington company and so forth. So I was overjoyed, and I did something very long here. I held it in my hand. You're never supposed to do that out of it. You corrupt the protein or anything that might have been on it. So next slide. So I'm going to explain a little bit of what we found. Two groupings of musket balls. We found a total of 32 musket balls. 18 fired British musket balls. 9 fired colonial musket balls. 1 dropped colonial musket ball. And 7 that we could not distinguish one way from the other through measurement. However, most of those were with the other grouping of colonial fired musket balls. So we believe that they were also musket balls. So here we have what we think. Here's the British column marching this way. And there's a little bridge called Nelson's Bridge right here, and a little stream ran up here. It was kind of a choke point for the British. So they're coming back and they would have to slow to cross the bridge and so on. But the British were excellent in light infantry tactics, and what they would do is they would send out flanking parties to push the colonials beyond 50 and perhaps 100 yards. That meant their muskets were ineffective as far as I will show you they were inaccurate as far as they were concerned. 50 yards is really probably their limit of accuracy. So they sent out a flanking gun right here, and here are the Captain Parker's men here. Now, would you go to the next slide, please? What we found was that this hill here, we found, I did something wrong here. This hill here is the ambush site that Captain Parker set up. It was a woodlot, it had lots of trees, it also had large rocks that one could hide behind. So it was a perfect ambush site. The British would have been down this way here, just crossing the stream, sending out a flanking party. And next slide, please. Well, the flanking party never really got distributed out as they usually do. They would take distance, a few yards in between. But now the Captain Parker's men caught them as they were, before they had extended out.
And what we found then was right in this position here, I can get the numbers. 14 musket balls in that area, all clustered quite close together, which gives us the feeling that, and I think maybe almost a decision, that here was where the flanking position was. These were colonial musket balls, including the ones we classified as unknown, but actually we think were part of the colonial musket balls. So they were all clustered there, and that leads us to believe that they hadn't quite extended the flanking department yet, and the militia caught them as they were doing so. Then on that rising ground that I showed you before, where Captain Parker was located here, that's where all the British musket balls are almost in a line. And so it really established the position of where they were. What we picture here now, this is what the National Park, a brand new map that they've done since we did our investigation. And it shows Parker's men retreating so that they kept following the British column all the way into Lexington, where they were firing at Canaanites and dispersed. So we have the British here, all the way colonial fired musket balls. We have Captain Parker here with all the British musket balls. So it seems clear to us that what happened was Parker took up position on that hillside. When the British sent out their flanking guard, and they came within range 40 meters, which is about 44 yards, 43 yards or something like that, that Parker fired. But they fired with them just once, because there weren't many musket balls there. And there was a dropped colonial musket ball up there on the hill, which meant that perhaps someone attempted to load his musket again, but dropped the musket ball, and then they fled precipitously. 2 men were killed from Captain Parker's company that afternoon, and 1 wounded, Sergeant Francis Brown, in the cheek. We don't know if it was here, but they had to skedaddle pretty quickly, and it might have been that they suffered casualties here. We don't know if any British were wounded here or not. None of the bullets showed any hemoglobin or anything like that. Some historians have postulated that Colonel Smith was unhorsed here. Another that Captain Parsons was wounded here as well in the British, but we don't know. We don't know if they actually shot anyone, because there's no evidence that we can say, except that firing a musket closer than 50 yards, that's a good range for someone to get shot. So that's my conclusion. Thank you. I would say, however, that this is the book that was made up about the investigation. You can see how it's over 300 pages long, very detailed. You can actually find this online. If you want to go to
It's referenced in the book.
the address, yeah, okay. The only recommendation I have is there's lots of pictures of me in there. And some wonderful words about me and so forth, so it's well worth it.
You took part in that.
Yes, I was with the Friends of Minuteman and also from the 10th Regiment, and we actually recruited a pile of reenactors to go out there and get rid of all of the brush and the bramble and the poison ivy. And several of our members swelled up. But yes, just as Bill was saying, clearly we know that they were drinking either Bud or, I don't know, Blue Ribbon or something like that. Because there were these, this is again, back in the day of pull tabs, right? Not the little flip tabs we have today. These were the ones you pulled off and they came loose and you dropped them. So they were everywhere up there. And they sound just like a musket ball.
I just want to also say that if you walk the path in the national park, as it turns behind the Lincoln thing, there's quite a good, a button you can push and hear the story of this.
Yeah. And the musket balls are on display at the Route 2A Visitor Center.
Whenever it's open.
Yeah, when it's over. We're working on that.
All right, well, I'm Carol Webb, and I had the great privilege of working with Carla on editing and putting together in a book these amazing stories. I have always been interested in 18th century American history, and when we moved here to Lexington about 8 years ago, we felt like we had, found the exact right town for us. So the way the book came together, as Carla said, was various people, including Bill Poole and Paula Shaughnessy, wrote stories about the things you could see in Lexington that they've already described. And I considered it a privilege to learn from them during the project. So I wanted to kind of get a discussion started, and one of the first questions I wanted to ask of our panel is, what excites you the most when you're learning about people's stories from the past? Anybody want to chime
Well,
in?
for me, it just personalizes them. You read a history book and it's just, maybe it's an occasional picture and so forth. But when you read what somebody said or what somebody experienced and so forth, it makes it personal, it makes it real.
I'll echo that. You read these letters and, plus ça change, plus ça même chose. It stays the same. There's still, these army soldiers are still talking about, well, I need more money for shirts, and socks. I've run out of socks. All of my socks have holes in them. Things like that. And of course, then the terror of the actual day. And then, 3 weeks later, well, I need more socks.
So what, Chris, did you want to add anything, or?
No, I don't want to add that.
Okay, or Ben, did you want to add anything?
I wasn't working with people, of course, when I,
Right,
except that I had to put myself in the mind of the person who designed and built the meeting house. And it was a fascinating process. I threw away many pieces before I could actually figure out the way that this building had been constructed. So it was a real pleasure to actually put myself in the mind of the builders in 1714.
And there's a lot of historical research involved in that as well.
yeah, all of these stories, they're deeply researched by you guys, and some funny anecdotes that you talked about how the different committees differed. Yeah, committees, town meeting members. So was there, what was the most surprising thing that you encountered when you were doing the research that led to what you wrote about?
I found archaeology exhausting. Right? It's really hard work. Now, each figure is just a little scraping, but we used to go through with a metal detector strapped to your arms and a little trowel holster, dragging a shovel behind you. I had to keep a shovel behind me because, of course, the metal detector would pick up the shovel. And you're also wearing metal-toed boots And just after about an hour or so of swinging around with a metal detector like that, it was hard, but exciting. As I say again, the most exciting thing to be, you dig down, you locate something, and then you dig around it. So let me stand up here. You're kind of a circle, a shovel, and you take that and claw the earth out. And then you have what is called a pointer, which is a little metal detector that looks like a little flashlight, and it's pointy. And then you search whether you've got it here in the clod or back here in the ground, and you take out your trowel. And the trowels are wonderful because they have a slivering edge that you can cut roots. And mine, I think, was the deepest one, 9.5, and it was right at the base of the tree, and I was sawing little roots off and so forth. But finding those musket balls and knowing right here in that spot, in this place, was fought that skirmish between the British and at that time, 240 years ago, the only musket ball they had, thinking, my gosh, nobody has seen this. It's not seen the light of day for all that time. It was fantastic.
How often do you get to dig up a battlefield? You know, I mean, for me, it's happened once.
That was when you met Meatball.
That's right. Exactly. We found one musket ball that was flattened. You can tell whether they've been fired or dropped. And the dropped one was my, my whoops, you know, reaching for something and he drops it. But there was one in front of a rock. I think you know about this one. One in front of a rock that was flattened. Hits the rock, falls in front of it. Right.
And the rock was shaped like this, and you can see it. The musket ball had that same indentation.
Yeah.
Right down in the ground. So that was a British musket ball, obviously, fired at the militia, and they were that rocky both sides.
I'll give one, sorry.
Yeah.
Prattles will. I'll give you one other, was actually realizing that I was standing where Amos Doolittle must have stood. It's Vine Street. I just looked it up, you might have seen this using my magical phone. It's Vine Street, which is the little, what I think is original Woburn Street. And you go down there and it's the Vine Brook Conservation Area, which has a big hill in the middle of it. And there's now a house right in front of the hill. So when you get up there, you're looking at the back of the house. But if it were not there and the trees were not there, you can look at the Doolittle print and you can line up just where the hills and everything is and what is his field of view. And there's only one place where that works. Rather amazing.
So, yes, Ken?
Just one small correction. The person who actually sketched the place
Oh, you're
was
right.
Ralph Earl.
That's correct.
Ralph Earl. And he gave the sketches to Doolittle, who was the printer for those. And the interesting thing about Ralph Earl was that he was, his loyalties were somewhat questionable. And he actually was more of a loyalist than a patriot. Just on the sideline.
Yeah.
That particular part of the street.
And Doolittle was terrible at drawing people. Earl was better.
So I wanted, for those of you who don't know what the Doolittle prints are, these two panels depict part of the Doolittle prints. There are 4 of them, and we reprint them with little legends in the book. And as Ben said, when Earl and Doolittle came to town, it was within days of the battle, and we think I'm going to put my little hat on, think that it's one of the most accurate representations of what happened that day. So that kind of gets to, how do we know what we know when we look at history? And when you look, obviously, when you're looking at archaeology, you have the actual evidence. But sometimes you're reading documents, right? The Percy's letters.
Before we ever walked onto the site, We did historiography, every historian who wrote about it. We found every map, including aerial surveys of the area, so that we could see if it had changed over time until what was still there. So then we wrote up what we thought happened, and I didn't read this, but there was just one description of the battle. One description. And it was by Nathan Monroe, who was a member of Captain Parker's company, when he was 77 years old in 1824. He wrote this, and this is all that we knew about the battle. About the middle of the forenoon, Captain Parker, having collected part of this company, marched them toward Concord, I being one of them. We met the regulars in the bounds of Lincoln about noon, retreating towards Boston. We fired on them and continued to do so until they met their reinforcements in Lexington. Only statement ever about the battle. So we had to really find every piece of evidence we possibly could. There weren't many people around to tell us what had happened.
So, yeah, the historiography, you mentioned the understanding what historians were doing and their arguments for interpreting it this way or that way.
Yeah. And you find that they're not all accurate. And historians have a habit of wanting to spice things up. So, you know, the fact that Colonel Smith, Lieutenant Colonel Smith was shot, that's kind of made up. It's based on the idea that we know by the time they reached the next stopping spot, he was wounded. And then Captain Parsons, David Hackett Fisher put that in there. I don't know any place where it says Captain Parsons was wounded right here and so forth. So they embellish a little bit, and it's up to you to be a little bit cautious when we're reading this stuff.
I found that too, with the original source of the sources I used for this was the Doolittle print. And in 1896, the Historical Society published a layout of the floor plan of the second meeting house. And I found problems with both of them. That I had to, it's 3 months to work out exactly what I should believe and what I should not believe about those sources. I fortunately, I visited, you had a picture there of your Rocky Hill Meeting House in Main Street. I also visited the meeting house in Sandown, New Hampshire, and one in Linfield. And the other source was the HAS, the Historic American Building survey of the 1930s and 40s, which was a WPA project for our architects of doing detailed architectural drawings of historic American buildings. So two of those meeting houses were there. So I use that as a resource. But the problem with the you can see in that table right there with the Doolittle print, you can see that the windows, the lower, there are 6 windows in the lower or 4 at the second level. Now, they had Earl drew theirs or Doolittle copied it wrong so that the windows were offset from one another. You can see that. And I worked and worked and worked. How did they get the posts that need to hold the building in that wall? And I finally said, I'm just going to have to leave that behind. I'm going to think like the builder and go it this way. So there was a place for the posts to go between the windows here, and here, and here. Otherwise, there was no place anywhere between here and there where a post could go up. Because these posts, of course, are supporting the 2 galleries, so that it just couldn't work. So I had to say, I just had so much about the Doolittle print was accurate, and I really depended upon that. But that was one of the pieces that was not.
So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I, talking about historiography and how things are depicted, if you look at all the, you have the Doolittle Prince, and then you have people who did their representation through time. And if you go through time, they go from everyone running away, militia, in the Doolittle,
As you would have.
to these bare-armed, muscular Minutemen firing in the face of the regulars and so forth. It's just somebody made that up, so.
By the late 19th century, they're all in their shirt sleeves,
Right.
rolled up, shaking their fists, it's great stuff.
So one thing I always wondered was the level of exaggeration that you see when you look at some of these documents, the narrative of Reverend Jonas Parker, and there's women being thrown out of child bed into the street, and and also the various depositions that were taken after the battle, and some right after, some 50 years later. It seems like the fish gets bigger and bigger in every telling. So wanted to, after this discussion, we'd love to hear from you guys what you would like to ask any of the panelists. Yes, Sarah?
Started. One of my favorite things, I actually did this in a program many years ago. There was one woman who did describe being thrown out of her house, but she was from Cambridge. And she was one of the only women that was interviewed after the battle, because they were really interviewing folks who witnessed the battle firsthand or who were actively harassed by the British soldiers. Because people were trying to get their narrative straight, that we did not start this, anything we did was self-defense, they attacked us. So very few women were involved. But one thing that did not come up, and not to belabor the archaeology club, I also have an archaeology background. Paul and Bill, you also have the very unique experience, having done this, of being reenactors as well as archaeologists. And Paul, I know one of the most moving things that I ever heard you talking about was being in the line of Patriot fire and standing amongst the musket balls. And I wonder if you guys could elaborate on what that was like for you, having portrayed these people before and then being in the actual position.
I can describe that moment. So most of the musket balls, it seemed, were found in a single day. I mean, we've been going, it wasn't really, it was over a few days. But
3 weeks of searching.
right. But it had been a lot of nothing, bottle cap. And then suddenly I heard over the phone that, wow, we're finding, and then they were essentially in 2 lines. So this wasn't a big battle. This was bang, and people stood, right? A running event. But the archaeologists marked all of the British musket balls, which were on the street, and again, it's a slope like this, making a tipped bowl. So if it had been a flat field, these musket balls would have gone everywhere, but they didn't. The ones from being fired from up here ended up down in mud. And the ones being fired here went into the side of the hill, telling you this is where they were standing. So they marked all of these with red and blue little pennants. They were about this high. And I happened to be dressed that day. It was one of the days we met with all of the historians and such. And I just wandered out there, and I realized that I was standing exactly where they would have stood. Not where the actual pennants are. They were behind me, because these are the balls that missed. And ditto for the people on the hill. And you could see exactly where they were standing and where the British were standing. That was
Yes?
I heard Sarah mention women and that we don't hear much about them. And I'm wondering if you guys can talk about Margaret Tudor and your decision to put her in the gallery and the significance of her being present in the meeting.
I have something happening with the Margaret story. I know the basis of.
Do you want to stand up and,
Yeah.
or actually, I can give you a microphone here and then
All right.
you can actually walk up
I,
to the model.
I have a friend who is a professor at Mass Art, and so I asked her, I need someone who can do carving. And so she got me in touch with a student at Mass Art who was a sculptor carving student, and he was the person who created the figures of the 5 figures that are in the meeting house, including Jonas Clark. And up here in the top gallery, of course, was Margaret Tulip. Now, she was, I have forgotten some of the details, but she was enslaved, was free, but then re-enslaved, and then she took her case to court, and so and the court found in her favor, have I got it more or less right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, if anyone's planning on coming to our annual meeting, which is on April 7th, it's open to everyone. You do not have to be a member of the History Museums to join us, but we're actually going to be starting a new series. As you see around the room here, we have a variety of leading Lexingtonians, people who made history throughout time, some of whom we have artifacts of and some of whom we don't. The first highlighted person that we are going to be discussing is Margaret Tulip. We have a wonderful member, Leslie Masson, who works with LexMedia, which is our local women's history group, and she has spent years researching Margaret's story, her court case, and even tracking down her descendants. So if you're interested, there are upcoming events, bookmarks on your chairs.
One of the funny elements of her story, you hold on to that, let me use this one. Funny facts related to her story is, guess who represented the people who didn't want to let the family, the Muzzies, right? Who didn't want to let her go? None other than John Adams. So, yeah. So.
Who also represented the British in the case of the Boston Massacre.
Right, right. One of the sites that we, speaking of women, that we have in the book is our new women's monument, which I really wish we could get more of an informative signage for so that we can identify several of those people in that monument are actual people, not just representations. And we tell a couple of the stories of a couple of those women in the portion of the book that talks about the women's monument. And one of them was Anne Harrington. And she was the mother, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, of the fifer, the day of the battle, Jonathan Harrington. And when things seemed, when the word came that the regulars are out, she went and woke up her teenage son and said, something must be done. And many of you might know that that was the theme of the whole Women's Monument project, something must be done.
LexMedia has published a small pamphlet just describing that and telling the stories of all the women who are depicted in the monument.
Yeah.
Hoping to get more permanent signage for that. There's two that both Harringtons are on monument. Abigail, who is the mother, and Anna, who is the political protester of the revolution, who made fabric for the Patriot cause. And the sculptor Meredith Bergman wanted to have these parallels between folks, particularly with the revolution. So on one side of the monument is Anna Harrington and her spinning wheel, and then on the other side is Margaret Tulip proclaiming that from her court case that she is free and not a slave. And they were very lucky. One of the women who was involved with like see her and Vivian Worthy, who had done some of the research, posed for the monument. They had not yet located Margaret's descendants, but at the point that they did, the sculpture was about half finished. And so one of her descendants actually had casts of her hands taken. And so when you walk up to the monument, it is designed so that you can actually hold hands with Margaret, and that hand is a descendant of that woman.
So, yeah, there are so many stories here in Lexington of the things that we might pass by every day, including first the representation of Percy's canon. And as we've said, the book can be used as a guidebook, but also just to read these interesting stories. So really happy you guys were able to come tonight. I wanted to point out that the meeting house model will be here for 2 weeks. So if you want to come spend more time looking at it or send people you know to take a look at it, it'll be here for 2 weeks. And
And we'll be open every day but Tuesday, starting this Friday.
And what are the 2 weeks? Starting today?
Starting Friday. The week start this Friday. Okay, but it'll be a week from that Tuesday afterwards. So you're not open, so it's still Wednesday. So starting day after tomorrow, and then for 2 weeks until the second Tuesday after.
yeah, the museums are getting into full,
Yeah.
getting ready for Patriots Day.
And the books are on sale tonight.
They are,
They-
and they're discounted tonight. And are there other questions from the audience? Does anybody have anything to ask?
Well, then I'd like to thank our panelists and Sarah, who was the organizer of this evening. So thank you very much.